Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm a senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom, when we look at religion and philosophy and how things have developed over time, where we are now, and maybe where we're going. This week, the question is, are we ready to take charge? Now, of course, the answer from humanists is, yep, we already did that. But of course, much of the world's population still thinks there is some kind of something out there that is in charge, that is thinking these things through. So I want to think a little bit about that and the transition from one to the other this week. And so one thing is, of course, 1859 and the publication of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. You probably know the story that he held on to this idea long after he had thought about it, fighting with his conscience, worrying about what would happen when this finally came out, and sharing some of his ideas with a circle of friends. So he was being pretty tight-lipped about what he was thinking, because he knew that it was earth-shattering, and he was a bit worried. Well, his earliest supporter was a man by the name of Thomas Henry Huxley, 1825 to 1895, a fellow biologist and scientist. Right after the book came out, Huxley must have been either a speed reader or he skimmed it. But anyway, just days after the book was published, he wrote a letter to Charles Darwin, and he said this: "As for your doctrines, I am prepared to go to the stake if requisite. I trust you will not allow yourself to be in any way disgusted or annoyed by the considerable abuse and misrepresentation which, unless I greatly mistake, is in store for you. And as to the curs which will bark and yelp, you must recollect that some of your friends at any rate are endowed with an amount of combativeness, which, though you have often and justly rebuked it, may stand you in good stead. I am sharpening up my claws and beak in readiness," which of course is a reference to the observations in the book. Notice that Huxley does use the word doctrine and his being prepared to go to the stake. And he is, of course, pretty well summarizing and seeing what the heresy of The Origin of Species is going to be, and noticing that this is a very religious kind of book in its implications, and he is prophesying what did actually happen, which was a considerable abuse and misrepresentation, which, unless I greatly mistake, is in store for you. Yeah, and this is some of the what was in store. On the right there is Mr. Huxley playing with a bit of a monkey there. But Charles Darwin is very, very often portrayed in Victorian era contemporary stuff as being an ape with his head on there, and this is everywhere in the press of the day. Very early on, just 7 months after the publication of Origin of Species, there was the Oxford evolution debate, which has gone down in history and really has developed a bit of a mythology around it. It was Huxley debating with Bishop Samuel Wilberforce, who lived from 1805 to 1873. Contrary to legend, and interestingly enough, Wilberforce did not argue from biblical texts, but rather he debated the science of the book. He was a very well-read, very educated person, and was going with the science that had predated Origin of Species as an argument against it. So he wasn't just yelling that Genesis was actually correct. Very interesting. This is a quote from a Lewis Carroll biographer, actually. "The bishop was the holy terror of his time. He shows up on the wrong side of every dispute." So quite the force of nature. Even Queen Victoria didn't like him. So he was... Now, of course, this leads to what, the cliche that agnostics, atheists, and the scientific types still live with today. Place your hand on Darwin's Origin of Species and repeat after me as an oath to swear. But in some ways, again, insightful, because there is a religious component to what the origin of species means. A couple of quotes from Thomas Huxley. "I am too much of a skeptic to deny the possibility of anything." He was very, very careful to argue from the known science of the day, also always saying this is the known science of the day, and leaving opportunities for new ideas. He also said the secret of genius is to carry the spirit of childhood into maturity. So again, that scientific idea of endlessly questioning and playing with these ideas. Huxley saw, as did a few other people of his day, that far from destroying religion, natural selection paved the way for a new one. This is one of the scientific clubs of London of the day. And here is the register for the membership of the First Unitarian Society. As I've mentioned before, First Unitarian Society was an outgrowth of the Liberal League, and then became a Darwin Reading Society over time. Again, looking very seriously at what this origin of species would mean. This is a page from 1887. The congregation did incorporate in 1881, very much in this time period when people were wrestling with what the origin of species meant for the human religious and moral impulses. This is Huxley again from 1889. So again, First Unitarian Society had already incorporated, was already functioning as a congregation. He said this: "So I took thought, and I invented what I conceived to be the appropriate title of agnostic. It came into my head as suggestively antithetic to the Gnostic of church history, who professed to know so much about the very things of which I was ignorant. To my great satisfaction, the term took." So 1889, again, First Unitarian Society coming out of the origin of species discussions, but the term agnostic and the terms humanist had not yet been invented, as they were wrestling with these ideas of trying to figure out what the new ideas were going to mean. Huxley also wrote this: "If one of these people in whom the chance worship of our remoter ancestors thus strangely survives," so a chance worshiper, just someone who thinks, oh, a thunderstorm, God must be doing something, that kind of thing, "should be within reach of the sea when a heavy gale is blowing, let him betake himself to the shore and watch the scene. Let him note the infinite variety of forms and size of the tossing waves out at sea, or against the curves of their foam-crested breakers as they dash against the rocks. Let him listen to the roar and scream of the shingle as it is cast up and torn down the beach, or look at the flakes of foam as they drive hither and thither before the wind, or note the play of colors, which answers a gleam of sunshine as it falls upon their myriad bubbles. Surely here, if anywhere, he will say that chance is supreme, and bend the knee as one who has entered the very penetralia of his divinity. But the man of science knows that here, as everywhere, perfect order is manifested, that there is not a curve of the waves, not a note in the howling chorus, not a rainbow glint in a bubble, which is other than a necessary consequence of the ascertained laws of nature, and that with a sufficient knowledge of the conditions, competent physico-mathematical skill could account for and indeed predict every one of these chance events. That's religious naturalism at work, and a statement of awe and wonder from a scientist who very early on understood the implications of the origin of species. Thanks for joining me today. That's the question of the week. Are we ready to take charge in this new world? Wednesday night, join me for Bibles and Beer. This week, Getting Judgy, Deborah and Ehud, and yep, one of the more famous knifings in Scripture. I'll see you tomorrow.